My name is Maggie. I came from China. I was a human rights activist. I actually was thrown into a Chinese prison for a while. And I came to Canada in 2009. Pretty soon I noticed numerous problems with my phones, my internet, my cell phones, my ordinary communications. I gave a few examples. At first, my phone was a month after I arrived with two bills. One is my name, the other is a very similar name called, my name is Ho Wen Zhuo, the other name is Ho Wen Feng. Two bills bundled up together. I didn't think very much. Pretty soon I noticed that my phone had problems. And then, I can give you a long list, but I'll say briefly. I made a call to New York, about a Chinese human rights case. Artist Ivy Wei was attacked. So I called that, and right after that phone call, my phone and internet, boom, dead. And I can tell you that my cell phone, now I have number 5 cell phones, and I changed the 5 numbers, and they don't help. I got my BlackBerry Z10. I thought it's secure, doesn't help at all, And because I knew it, because physically I can see there's an eye watching me all the time, right under where I enter my passwords. And I can tell you, I was at Ottawa University. My account at Ottawa University, I was terribly compromised. I taught at Ottawa U. I studied, and my student accounts were compromised. And I worked briefly at Ottawa Rape Crisis Center. And guess what? That office phone, ever since I worked, 5 times collapsed. And I want to say, however, there's something about me as a Chinese human rights activist who speak against Chinese government. There's something we can share, we can work, we can learn from each other, and we can work and collaborate. Because although there's numerous Western companies suffered from the espionage, there's far more Chinese people are victims of Chinese governments.
Okay, is there a question?
Yes, I want to ask them, because people need to think about a much bigger level. Chinese people are willing to and want to, because this cyber espionage is a universal problem. So why don't we persuade politicians and the business people? Can we work together with the Chinese people, particularly the Chinese human rights and democracy activist people, to change that regime? Is there something we can, because that regime is another Hitler regime.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's a good question, because although we've been talking about espionage, crime, and war, we didn't talk at all about the human rights aspect. So Mandiant has an annual conference about incident detection and response, and I run the management track, so I basically get to invite whoever I want and see them. And so one of the speakers we have next week is a Tibetan activist whose organization has been phished, attacked via email and that sort of thing for the last 10 years. And so she's going to talk about her experience and how it's possible for a small organization to defend itself. And it's my first sort of small step into trying to draw some connections between the corporate security world and the world of activists and those sorts of people who are always being attacked.
One bit of advice I'd have for you is, I actually, as mentioned earlier, you got to go to law enforcement and get their help, because you know what, if law enforcement starts monitoring you, the bad guys are going to be worried about the fact that they're going to be giving their malware, their attack techniques away to law enforcement, which doesn't include how to detect them and other entities that are being attacked. So you are a great source of information for our very defenses. Seriously.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to what you say. In fact, a lot of what you started our malware practice from was actually looking at at-risk communities, specifically the Uyghurs, the Tibetans living in India, as well as other minorities throughout the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. And it became clear to us that these are highly, highly targeted communities. In fact, just recently we ran an experiment where we put some of our detection technology into an ISP that works in Dharamsala, which is where the Tibet community, that the exile community lives in India. And we found that approximately a third of their traffic was beaconing out highly targeted malware that we weren't seeing anywhere else. So this was specifically targeted these groups in order to be able to build profiles. And what kind of stuff are they looking for? Well, so the war story, one of the things that they were looking for out of the office of the Dalai Lama was his meeting schedule. And why was that? Because if they could find out who he was going to meet, they could put pressure on people who were hosting the meeting not to have a meeting with him. You know, so this is targeted but also exploited to political means. And I'm very sympathetic to what you have to say. I wish that there was something that could be done except for raising awareness about it, but really I think it's collective action and getting your word out that will make a difference.
Next question.
My question is, you've been talking about attacking companies with their intellectual property, but have they also gone after their, just like in personal identity theft, gone after their finances, their accounts, so that you wake up the next day and all of a sudden you're bankrupt? Are financial institutes strong enough to withstand those sort of attacks?
You may find this interesting that the activity we see out of China is typically not focused towards financial institutions. To the extent they go after those organizations, it's mainly for merger and acquisition data. So they want to know who's being bought, who's being sold, could they influence it, are they involved in the transaction? We don't see them, for the most part, engaging in the sort of criminal activity you'd see out of Eastern Europe. Now, that's not to say there aren't criminal groups in China who do that, but the activity is much less. In other words, when we think of cybercrime, the very first place I think of is Eastern Europe. I don't think of that coming out of China. Now, as a war story, as a fellow panelist mentioned, we have seen some attacks by Chinese military units on the gaming industry. In other words, they go after e-gold. I don't play World of Warcraft or any of that kind of stuff, but they've been attacking those communities, and we think it's because there are, as many of you might know, there are labor camps in China, where during the day the prisoners are forced to work, and the stories we're hearing now, this is reported in the media, that they work during the day and they hack at night. And what they're doing in hacking at night is they're farming e-gold. They're playing these massively multiplayer games, developing whatever it is, spells and weapons and all that kind of stuff. And then they sell that stuff for real money. And so we think that there's at least one Chinese unit, some general decided, hey, this is a good way to make some money on the side. So he essentially sold the use of his military hacking technology and tools to this labor camp to then have his people hack at night and make that money. So we do see some of that activity. But honestly, if your bank account's going to be emptied, it's probably going to be by a criminal group. And we see two forms of that, just quickly. One of them is small businesses whose accounts are not covered by the same sorts of laws, at least in the States. In other words, it's much easier to empty out a small business account and not be able to recover the money. Or secondly, you see large attacks against ATMs, where over the course of a weekend, tens of millions of dollars will be stolen out of ATMs using copied cards. And what the hackers have done is, they're one part of a larger criminal enterprise where inside the financial institution, they've taken the limits off the cards, they've disabled the audit software, and then these guys go out and spend 12 hours emptying every ATM they can find, and then they all disappear. So boy, this is just an awesome topic. It's such an awesome thing. That's the sort of thing we also see.
Okay, the next question.
Yeah, I just want to share experience. For a few years, I find a certain directory in my hard drive just disappeared, and the next one a few years later disappeared. So I was but looking at the pattern, why it has disappeared. It's I've been in the past few years helping the victim of persecution. We have a Canadian citizen. When he go back to China, he was tortured and arrested, tortured for practicing Falun Gong, a spiritual practice for following truth, compassion, forbearance. And then after he came back, he asked, he wanted to file a lawsuit, and in one step he took is ask Attorney General to prosecute the former president of China, Jiang Zemin, who initiated persecution. So I find that's the first directory to go, and then there's a few other cases. So obviously, from this pattern, you know who stole this material, and because we are not company, I'm not.
Do you have a question for the
Okay,
panel?
yeah. So there's no backup. So sometimes it really put you in a hard situation because, you know, what can you do, right? Like you. So my question is, yeah, really, any advice for us, you know, like to protect ourselves from
Okay,
this?
so advice for individuals.
It's a very complicated question. There probably needs to be some sort of document written to sort of outline all these best practices. But one of the things you can do is, if it's on a piece of paper, they have to steal it physically. So if you print it, it can't be destroyed. Same thing as if it's burned to a CD-ROM. If it's on a CD-ROM, they can't unburn it, as long as you're actually using a CD-ROM and not one that's erasable. So that's the first two things that come to mind. The third thing would be, if you use a computer that's not connected to the internet and you don't share documents via USB or something, in other words, let's say you're composing documents and then you're printing them or something like that, that's one way that you could have these things be safe. Honestly, it's the confluence of computing, connected to the internet, and then sharing documents via USB or something to that effect that results in the vulnerability. So if you shelter yourself that way, you will be able to protect yourself from people that are someplace else.
Let me just add a little bit quickly. They take advantage of trust. And I've had occasions where I've gotten an email from a friend who had a smartphone, sent me just a link. So it's for somebody I trust, and if I had clicked it, I would have been infected. And so when they do this, and they take advantage of trust, they're attacking you, and that once you're broken, you're broken. I mean, in speaking with George Garner, the guy that developed the memory analysis tool that I was using, he made comments because he had other customers in sensitive areas that he said their opinion is when you get advanced intruders, nation-state guys, you know, they can do things like refreshing the firmware, things you don't think about that antivirus isn't going to deal with, you know, for the DVD drive or BIOS or otherwise. Your machine is forever infected. You might as well just get rid of it.